Hello, you lovely lot. Me again, Miss Melding, talking you through today rounding decimals. So, what we need to do is we need to be thinking about our rule for rounding that we usually use with whole numbers, but we'll come on to that in a moment. So let's have a little go at an introductory activity. Here we have some digit cards, and it's asking us to use the digit cards below to complete the number on the place value chart. How many different combinations of numbers can you make? Order them from smallest to largest. So whenever you get a question like this, always do it in some sort of order. So first of all, we can clearly see that we can use 0.456. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the 4, but swap around the 5 and the 6 so that the 6 goes there and the 5 goes there. There are no more combinations that I can make using my 4 in the tenths column. So I'm just going to move on to do the 5 in the tenths column. And we'll have the 4 in the hundredths column and the 6 in the thousandths column. Keep the 5 in the tenths column, and this time swap around the 6 and the 4. Okay, now that's all I can do with the 5 in the tenths column. So now we're going to start with the 6 in the tenths column. And we're just going to simply put the 4 in the hundredths column and the 5 in the thousandths column. And then we're going to put the 6 in the tenths column again. This time swap around the 5 and the 4. Obviously if I was doing this nicely I would have written 0 point and then the digits quite close together. So there we have 0.456, 0.465, 0.546, 0.564, 0.645, 0.654, and actually because we've done it in that way they are in order from smallest to largest, because the ones that have the lowest digit in the tenths column are the smallest. Okay, when we look in the hundredths column, this one has 5 hundredths, this number has 6 hundredths, so 0.456 is smaller than 0.465. Then when we've moved on to the 5 in the tenths column, again if we look in the hundredths column, we've got a 4 there and a 6 there, and we know that 4 is smaller than 6, so the next smallest is 0.546 and then 0.564. Finally we put our 6 in the tenths column, and in order to see which one is the smallest we have to look in our hundredths column, and we've got a 4 there and a 5 there, so the 0.645 is smaller than 0.654. And just to clarify that, there's the answers there, exactly what we got. Excuse me. Let's have a look at the activities for today then. So, we're going to be looking at rounding decimals. First of all, here on the place value chart, we have some place value counters. What we need to do is think about what number that is actually showing us. So that's the first job. The first job is to actually write down the number. So we have 4 ones, so it'd be 4 point, how many tenths? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 tenths. Excuse me, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hundredths. So that number is showing me 4.56. What we've got to do is to round this number now to the nearest whole number. So obviously we know that a whole number is not a decimal number, it has no decimal places. So when we look at 4.56, we actually have to look at the tenths column in order to round up or down to the nearest whole number. We can ignore anything this side of the tenths column. When we're rounding to a whole number, obviously we look at the column to the right of the whole number. Okay, so when we just have our ones column, if we look in the column to the right, that's the tenths column. We look at the 5. Now remember the rule for rounding. If the digit in the column that you're looking at is 5 or more, you round up. If the digit is 4 or less, you round down. So because we have a 5 in the tenths column, we're going to round up. So 4.56 rounded to the nearest whole number would be 5. Because if we've got 4.5 and we're rounding it up, then the next one is 5. Okay? Because remember, on a number line, 4.56 would be in between the whole numbers of 4 and 5. Okay, so if that helps, jot that down first. Write down your decimal number that you have. Look at your ones and think about which one would be this side and which one would be the next one up. When you've done that, then you can look in your tenths column. The 5 tells you to round up, so the whole number that it's rounded up to would be 5. Here we have another true or false question then. Here we have our number that they've given us, 4.36. This time it's saying about rounding it to the nearest tenth. Not to the nearest whole number this time, the nearest tenth. And they're telling us what they think it is. 4.36, when rounded to the nearest tenth, is 4.4. Now, they've given us a number line here which is helpful, because 4.36 comes in between 4.3 and 4.4. So when we're going to place it on the number line, be 4.3, 4.31, 4.32, 4.33, 4.34, 4.35, and then here would be 4.36. So they've already given us a helping hand by telling us which tenth we can either round down to or round up to. But, as with any other rounding, I'm going to look at this column here to the right hand side of my tenths in my hundredths column, because that 6 there will tell me whether I need to round up to 4.4 or round down to 4.3. And because it's a 6, I would round up. So 4.36 to the nearest tenth is 4.4. So that would be true. So just to recap, when we're rounding to the nearest whole number, we look at the tenths column to determine whether we're rounding up or down. When we're rounding to the nearest tenth, we look at the hundredths column to determine whether we're rounding up or down. And that is very similar to when we are rounding whole numbers. We always look at the column to the right hand side. So let's have a look at these ones then. Round 5.55 to the nearest tenth. So when I'm rounding to the nearest tenth, I'm going to look at the column to the right of the tenths, which is my hundredths column. 5.55, I can see that if I rounded it down, it would round down to 5.5. If I rounded it up, it would round up to 5.6. But remember, we are looking here at this digit in the hundredths column. That tells me to round it up. So 5.55 to the nearest tenth is 5.6. We still have the same number here, 5.55, but this time we've got to round to the nearest whole number. And again, they've given us the whole numbers. They've given us 5 or 6. This time, I'm not looking at the hundredths column because I'm not rounding to the nearest tenth. I'm rounding to the nearest whole number, so I look in the tenths column. And I have the digit 5, which tells me to round up So 5.55 to the nearest whole number would be 6. And those little arrows just show you where they would be on the number line. And finally, round these decimals, so the ones with green around them, to the nearest tenth and match them to the correct answer. So when we're rounding to the nearest tenth, remember, we're going to be looking at the digits in the hundredths columns. So, first job, 3.09, if that was on a number line, it would be in between 3.0 and 3.1. So the first job that we've done is we've thought about which tenths are either side of that number on a number line, 3.0 and 3.1. When I underline this digit in the hundredths column, it's a 9. The 9 tells me to round up, so 3.09 rounded to the nearest tenth would be 3.1. Do I have 3.1 there? Yes, I do. Excellent. Let's have a look at this next one. We've got 3.49. So this side of 3.49 must be 3.4. And the next tenth up, just add another 10 onto it. Sorry, tenth would be 3.5. Yeah, 3.4, you've got 4 tenths. Next tenth up, 3.5, because you've got 5 tenths. Again, we're looking in the hundredths column. I've got a 9, so that tells me to round up. 3.49 rounded up to the nearest tenth would be 3.5. And finally, just to double check, 3.94 on this side of my number line would be 3.9, and the next tenth up would actually go to 4.0. Okay, 3.9, add another tenth would be 4.0. When I look in my hundredths column though, I have a 4, and that digit 4 tells me to round down. So 3.94 rounded to the nearest tenth would be rounded down to 3.9. So let's have a little bit of a recap on those activities. Your first activity, you may have a place value chart. First of all, make sure you recognise what number is shown by that place value chart, and then think about what it's asking you to do. If it's asking you to round to the nearest whole number, look in the tenths column to think about whether you're going to round up or down. Next activity, you'll have a number and it'll give you a statement, so just read it very carefully. If you're rounding to the nearest tenth, you look at the hundredths column to decide whether to round up or down. Another one with some number lines, rounding the number to the nearest tenth or to the nearest whole number. So think about which column you're going to be looking at to decide whether to round up or down. And then finally match the answers with the correct rounding. This one is giving it to the nearest tenth, so yours may do as well, or it could be the nearest whole number. But have a good go at that. Really think about it, think about the rules for rounding, but also think about what would come either side of that number if it were placed on a number line. Good luck, have fun, bye bye.